The castle theme was a mainstay of the LEGO universe when I was growing up. As I've stated in previous videos, we didn't have much of it because I was into the space theme. My brother had the Knight's Procession, the Siege Tower, and several years later the Forestman's Camouflaged Outpost, a pack of castle figures, and that was about it. But I always loved castle LEGO and wished I'd had more of it. Flash forward to the now, and LEGO has produced what might be the ultimate tribute to their legendary medieval theme, the Lion Knight's Castle.
God and King Richard! Yeah!
It wasn't just a clever name. There were a lot of castles in the LEGO castle range, beginning with the famous Yellow Brick Castle in 1978. However, a few years later in 1984, the distinct factions emerged of the Lion Knights and the Black Falcons. The Lion Knights were given the King's Castle set, and the base for the Black Falcons was the Knight's Castle. In both cases, each castle was built with the potential for modular add-ons in the form of smaller sets like the Blacksmith Shop, Armor Shop, and Guarded Inn that were made with castle wall extensions so they could be added inside the footprint of your main castle. And even sets like the aforementioned Siege Tower and the Battering Ram came with additional sections of the castle wall, so with each acquisition, your fortress of choice could get even more imposing. When the 1990s got into full swing, dragons and wizards were brought into the castle theme, and by the 2000s they were shamelessly aping Lord of the Rings a decade before they managed to secure the license for actual Lord of the Rings products. However, with the Lion Knight's Castle, LEGO has returned to its original medieval roots. For the most part. The Lion Knight's Castle is a massive monument to the early days of the castle theme, and chooses to represent the Lion Knight's fortress, while the Black Falcons are included as a small war party complete with a mounted knight, and their version of Patsy from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. They're not exactly a formidable enough force to successfully siege a castle of this size, but it's nice the Black Falcons aren't left out of this mega set. The horses are, notably, an evolution on the LEGO horse we often think of, now with articulated rear haunches and more posed legs so the steeds can rear up during battle, and they include the caparisons, which is a nice option. The castle has been designed with stellar levels of detail in the build, including authentic arrow slits and really well done finishing around the castle windows and thatched roof sections. The exterior of the fortress has been designed around an elevated outcropping of rock, giving the design a hint of the 1990 King's Mountain Fortress, but even more so the architecture of Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, with the high keep only accessible by an inclined path above stretches of lower defensive walls. There are, as you would imagine, plenty of battlements for the defenders of the castle to occupy, and thankfully the set doesn't skimp on the Lion Knight soldiers. Your castle garrison won't look underserved by the end of the build. The figures can access the interior of the castle in a few ways. First and foremost is the imposing drawbridge, which raises and lowers at the turn of a knob, and the portcullis, which opens and slams down via a chain and pulley system at the top of the keep. If invading figures are on the drawbridge when it raises, they are immediately dumped into the dungeon of the castle rather than falling into the moat as you might expect. A second option for entrance into the heart of Lion Knight territory is a secured back door that also opens with the turning of a knob. This entrance is clearly for persons wishing to enter the castle discreetly on Dark of the Moon nights for all manner of secret meetings. Possibly a Black Falcon traitor giving up crucial information, or the other way around, where a traitor of the Lion Knights waits by the door to let in spies and invading troops. I was reminded of the Siege of Antioch in the First Crusade, where a traitor let the Crusaders into the city. The third way into the castle is via the base of this distinct tree that grows out of the bedrock. Behind the tree, the rock face moves away to reveal a grotto used by the forest men as a hideout. It's so close to the main drawbridge, I have to believe this secret door can only be used in the dead of night. Obviously, there is no way into the castle from here, but with the entrance to the grotto moved aside, the rightmost facing of the rock wall is now free to slide behind the tree, revealing an opening into one of the castle's dungeon prison cells. It's a cool way in, provided the forest men have a way to unlock that barred door. Or maybe it's more for rescuing prisoners, though I would think overuse of it for that purpose would result in the Lion Knights getting wise to the secret door. The fourth way into the castle is so secret, LEGO doesn't even give you reasonable access to it with the castle in one piece. To the left of the drawbridge, the moat flows into a cave that goes under the castle with an inaccessible destination that you can't see or reach. Meanwhile, up on the main battlement, the food and drink stand sits atop a hinged trap door that opens to reveal something below the floor. However, you can't find a way into this secret area from the interior or exterior of the castle, unless you pull the entire castle in half. The castle is designed to separate via clips right where the main battlement meets the keep. While this allows for more display possibilities with the castle itself, the main purpose is to allow you access to the central forestman hideout in the playset. Admittedly, as cool as this is, I'm not wild about the way they designed it, but I'll get back to that in a minute. The main interior of the castle can be accessed for the user by opening the two main sections of the castle by their central hinge points, allowing the playset to effectively double in width. It's really slick the way the designers made sure that the closed castle looks correct from all sides, with the keep and thatched living quarters resembling full buildings as the halves marry up precisely. But when opened, the design allows these now split areas to resemble separate structures entirely, so the illusion of the castle isn't broken in either configuration. What was once an outer water wheel is now between two sections of the castle built on either side of the natural brook. And the way they designed this transformation isn't a simple hinge, but includes engineering feats to preserve the castle's proportions. For example, here you can see the battlement wall itself expands as the castle is closed and recedes into the tower when opened to invisibly maintain the look of the battlement relative to the new section placement. Anyway, now that we're in the castle, let's look around. The water wheel I mentioned isn't just for looks. It's a functioning mechanism that operates the grist mill inside the castle just as it would have in medieval times. I was impressed by the level of simulation here. Off to the side is a food storage pantry. However, you'll notice when the castle is opened, there's no logical way into the pantry or the room with the grist mill. This is a strange fallacy of the Lion Knight's castle design. The exterior was engineered to look correct both open and closed. However, the interior erred on the side of making logical sense only when the rooms were closed, when you can't access them. So, for example, the kitchen has a stairwell at the back leading up to the second floor of the castle. When closed, the grist mill and pantry are part of that kitchen, so they are now in a room with a way out. But the whole kitchen is now inaccessible as a space. The main living room with the fireplace and harpsichord has a hallway entrance out onto the main battlement. But when opened, the royal dining table is isolated from the room and logically inaccessible. Above this, you have the playroom for the children, which actually has a working wood door off the adjacent tower. However, the bedchamber, which is part of that room when closed, is now isolated with no immediate way inside. The main entrance beyond the portcullis when closed has logical pathways out to the main battlement and the rear door of the castle, as well as ladder access to the lower dungeon and the armory above. And when closed, where all of those exits and entrances make sense, it's, like the rest of the castle, totally inaccessible. In no instance did LEGO design logical access to the top of the keep and towers, though this omission has been a running gag since LEGO started making castle sets. Probably the most inconvenient logic break of the opened castle is the splitting of the upper battlement behind the armory. See, LEGO had the moxie to include a medieval toilet in this castle, complete with what looks like a jokey bit of toilet roll, and the garderobe is correct with the outer room extension, the gap in the bottom for gravity to do its thing, and the very cheeky inclusion of a brown frog at the base of the tower right at ground zero, if you pick up what I'm putting down. Look, LEGO included a medieval shitter, which makes this the greatest LEGO playset ever by default, regardless of any shortcomings. That said, when the playset is opened, the garderobe becomes inaccessible, and that's bad news for Merlin, who's getting up there in years and can't hold it like the rest of the castle's residents.
Wizard, your life force is running out.
If you're asking why a wizard is here at all, well, he's a wink back at LEGO's history with their sorcerer figure, Magisto, from the mid-90s. There are other little winks to LEGO history in the castle, such as the skeleton in the dungeon, who also appeared in the castle line in the mid-90s at the same time as Magisto. The yellow toy castle in the children's room, harkening back to the original LEGO castle playset. And my personal favorite, the shields of the classic LEGO castle fodder factions that were some of the earliest castle livery designs, but never managed to rise to prominence like the Lion Knights and Black Falcons. Interestingly, while this set is called Lion Knight's Castle, there is some regional dispute about this, as the shield emblems of these knights that go all the way back to the early years of LEGO Castle were traditionally known as Crusaders in the United States, and only called Lion Knights in Great Britain. Meanwhile, a new Lion Knight faction had this imagery on their surcoats and shields starting in 2010. This gets even more confusing when you consider in Canada and Australia the Black Falcons were known as Eagle Crests and the Crusaders were known as Lion Crests, with the Lion Crests reverting to the Crusaders in those regions by the early 1990s. So in effect, this is the Crusaders' Castle for the United States, the Lion Knights' Castle for Great Britain, and the Lion Crests' Castle, or possibly Crusaders' Castle, for Australia and Canada. For those of you wondering then about the fodder faction shields I just referenced, the ones in the armory are up for more debate, while the ones in the main dining room are certainly generic shields from LEGO's earliest castle sets. The one with the crossed axes is the classic livery for the Crusaders' guards and basic soldiers. The other is tough to pin down, since sometimes they are included as Crusaders, and other times are argued to be an unnamed faction. So it could be interpreted as a spoil of war taken from them. This was the faction represented in that Knights Procession set I discussed in a previous video, so it's probably good they've been seemingly conquered, because they were likely mass murderers. Overall, I'm extremely impressed with the Lion Knight's Castle. How could a reasonable person not be? Where my critiques come into play involve the Forestmen in this design. While it's fair to assume a conflict between the Forestmen and the Crusaders, as that goes back to the vintage LEGO days, which, as an aside, is something that never made sense to me given Robin Hood's long-standing legend of supporting King Richard the Lionheart.
What, you condemn holy crusades?
Aye, I'll condemn anything that leaves the task of holding England for Richard to outlaws like me.
But hey, it is what it is. It's the design of the Forestmen's inclusion into this set that becomes frustrating. It feels like the Forestmen were just jammed in wherever they could find room in the model rather than making it a comprehensive idea. Most of the Forestmen areas are inconsequential or impossible to access, or both. Part of me doesn't understand why the entire bottom floor of the castle, with the exception of the dungeon, wasn't an interconnected level of tunnels and cave rooms underneath the main castle itself. This would have allowed people to easily access all of the Forestmen areas when the castle is opened without having to split the castle in half, while also allowing for more places where the Forestmen have secret doors and hatches into various parts of the fortress. Additionally, this great oxen and hay cart piece would have been twice as cool had they designed it to hide a Forestman inside. And while I understand everything has a budget for development, I would happily have sacrificed this storage alcove and this extra bit of armor racking to allow for some of these bottom floor rooms to move up to accommodate the Forestmen tunnels. Just from a design standpoint, the dungeon should be the only room on the lowest floor. The idea of the castle's food being prepped in the same area as the torture and rats is not a great thought. Lastly, this isn't a gripe so much as an observation about LEGO I can't stop noticing. LEGO sets like this really seem imposing and epic until you unwittingly put another set from the same theme next to it that should be much smaller. In this case, it's the blacksmith shop. This medieval house should be dwarfed by the Lion Knight's Castle, but it's the reverse. The house, being more in proper scale with the figures, comically towers beside the castle when displayed together. It's then that you truly realize how the design of splitting every room in the castle in half by opening them restricts the playable footprint of the spaces inside the structure when compared to the blacksmith shop, where the roof comes off and each level is spacious for play and manipulating the figures, something we as kids were familiar with when enjoying the designs of the classic LEGO castle interiors. Yet the classic castle interiors had less going on and were often staging yards for your defending troops, but the room for play was a different flavor. I'm not saying this castle doesn't afford tons of imaginative opportunities. I'm simply saying it's a different kind of appeal, where the miniature dollhouse approach was chosen over the get in there and play approach. The dollhouse choice often being very restricted in this environment due to the crammed layout and tight tolerances of things like the doorways, hallways, and hatch openings. The LEGO Lion Knight's Castle is one of the undeniable highlights of recent LEGO Anniversary releases, but a little more room to breathe and a stronger focus on adventure instead of harpsichords and hay bales would have made this even better. Thankfully, it's LEGO, so no matter what they decide, you can change all of it with a little time and planning. If it sounds like I'm laying siege to LEGO's efforts, well, at least I'm on theme.